Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, Ethiopia brings in heavy-handed measures under its state of emergency. Diplomats are banned from travelling much out of the capital. Scrutiny of social media is tightened and security forces ordered to stay close to home as the government ups its response to recent protests. Also, Congo's top court approves the postponement of presidential elections that have been scheduled for next month. The new date's still to be set, but the delay is likely to aggravate the country's political crisis. And we return to the seat of power of Rwanda's last regent. After having spent over 5 decades in exile, King Kigeli V has passed away after long hoping for a return to his homeland. But first, opponents to Congolese President Joseph Kabila are closer to seeing their fears become a reality. The country's top court on Monday agreed to allow presidential polls set for November to be pushed back. A date now has to be set. The scheduling of the polls has caused a political crisis, as Kabila's critics have long accused him of manoeuvring to stay on beyond the end of his mandate in December, and even of hoping to change the constitution to allow him to run again. Our Thomas Nicolon has more.
It's only after a few hours of ruling that DR Congo's highest court decided to approve the Electoral Commission's request, which asked for a deferment of the presidential election, which was due to be held before the end of the year. But both the Electoral Commission and the Constitutional Court agreed that the enlistment of all new voters was a priority, and the Constitutional Court authorized the Electoral Commission to establish a new electoral schedule. Now, in the meantime, at the National Dialogue, an agreement has been reached, and this agreement says that Joseph Kabila will remain in power until April 2018, and this delay will allow all new voters to be enlisted, and someone from the opposition should become prime minister shortly. Now, there still is a part of the opposition that denies everything that comes out of this dialogue, because they believe that the aim of this dialogue was only to allow Joseph Kabila to remain in power, and this radical opposition is still asking for one thing. They want Joseph Kabila to step down by the 19th of December, which is the end of his second mandate.
Thomas Nicolon there for us in Kinshasa. Well, Ethiopia's brought in more harsh measures under a state of emergency it imposed last week. Posting political updates on social media is now a crime, as is watching opposition TV stations set up by the diaspora. A curfew's been brought in, and diplomats forbidden from travelling more than 40 kilometres outside of the capital. It's the latest escalation of the state's response to fatal protests by the Oromo and Amhara ethnic groups. The crackdowns have caused international concern. Karim Laborde joins us now with more from Addis. Karim, so these new emergency orders are pretty heavy-handed in an already tense situation. What are they likely to achieve?
But these 35 measures seem to be phase 2 of the state of emergency, with a clear crackdown on freedom of movement and access to media. There are now red zones along the borders on the main roads in Ethiopia. Curfews have been put in place to prevent people from being anywhere near at night places like factories, farms, or government institutions. Diplomats are really struggling to understand why they are grounded in Addis, especially because Addis is the headquarters of the African Union and a diplomatic hub. As for the media, it's now illegal to only watch 2 TV stations run by the diaspora in the US, ESAT and OMN. And we as journalists are told that the few opposition parties left in Ethiopia cannot give us statements that could incite violence, which can apply to any criticism of the government, really. And you mentioned social media. Social media has been blocked for 3 weeks in Addis and months in Oromia and Amhara region, with no sign of easing up anytime soon.
So have there been any moves from the government to start dialogue with the opposition? We saw Prime Minister Deslam promise this last week. Has anything developed on that front?
So that was a promise made by both the Ethiopian president and prime minister last week. They said they differentiate between violent armed groups and legitimate protest. They said they're ready to open political space for the opposition and even to reform the electoral system so Ethiopia doesn't end up with 99 or 100% of the seats for the ruling party at every election. But fact is that nothing concrete has been announced yet, except for this reinforced crackdown, and many observers are doubtful that the Ethiopian regime will actually implement any serious reforms.
Thanks very much. Karim Labor there for us in Addis. On another news, at least one gunman was killed in Niger on Monday as security forces repelled an attempted prison break. The facility holds several Islamist militants linked to Nigerian Boko Haram militants. Nicholas Chemin has the story.
The body of one of the assailants in front of the Koutoukale prison. An armed group tried to attack the jail, which is considered the safest one in Niger. Many jihadists from Boko Haram and Malian groups are detained here. The attack was repelled, but members of the commando managed to flee.
Our forces pursued them. We hope to catch them. Our men are deployed. God willing, we'll catch them.
The defense minister told us these jihadist groups are based in northern Mali.
We have always said that northern Mali is a lawless area. This enables terrorists and drug dealers to prosper. And also, some of the armed groups who signed the peace deal in Mali are linked to terrorists. There really needs to be new measures so that the rule of law can return to northern Mali.
On Friday, a U.S. aid worker was kidnapped in Abalak. 2 guards were killed. The American had been living in Niger for 24 years, and authorities believe he is now in Mali. President Mahamadou Issoufou faces some tough challenges. He was re-elected in March after the opposition boycotted the second round. Niger faces attacks from jihadist groups based in Mali, but also by Boko Haram in the southeast of the country.
Well, in Nigeria, Boko Haram fighters claim to have killed over a dozen soldiers in a town in Borno State in the northeast. Nigerian and Nigerian soldiers were reportedly taken by surprise in the raid. The bloodshed highlights the ongoing threat posed by the insurgents, even as the town of Chibok celebrates. 21 of over 200 schoolgirls were released by Boko Haram last week, over 2 years after they'd been kidnapped. More violence from the militants is likely, but the families of the returned are, for now, overwhelmingly joyful.
We thank God because we didn't know that we would survive to see this day. Because of our kidnapping, we didn't know that we would ever dance like this again, the way we dance today. Everyone knows what we've been through. We also pray to God that Boko Haram may release the remaining girls in peace.
Thank you all. I never expected to see my daughter again, and I pray for those girls still left behind, that God will bring them back safely, the same way our own daughter came back alive.
I thank Boko Haram. I thank them for letting our children live until now. We beg them to please release the other girls they have kidnapped, because there are others, not our children, that have been kidnapped. I want them to release them so that they can be reunited with their families.
South Sudan's seen another surge of violence. At least 56 rebels and 4 government troops were reportedly killed in clashes over the weekend. The army claims that fighters loyal to former Vice President Riek Machar attacked soldiers near the city of Malakal. Both sides claim to now hold the towns of Wajwok and Lelu. The country descended into war in 2013 after President Salva Kiir accused Machar of plotting a coup. Rwanda's last regent has died. King Kigeli V ruled the country for less than a year before being forced into exile. He passed away in the US over the weekend. Our correspondent has visited the old seat of his power.
Nyanza, Rwanda's seat of kings. A fiefdom was established in this small town at the end of the 19th century. This hut is a replica of a traditional palace where the rule of kings transcended the Hutu-Tutsi ethnic divide.
It is a king of the citizens, not a king of a certain clan or a king of a certain class. That's why Rwandan kings had a very great importance in the unification of every Rwandan.
The last king, Kigeli V, came to power in 1959.
During his era of 2 years, 1959-61, he tried to continue the procedures of unification.
But his ambitions for independence saw Belgium, the colonial power, force him into exile. He died on Sunday, aged 80, in America, where he'd lived since 1992. Valerie Mukambunguje, 88, was a neighbour of the king here in Nyanza.
This king loved the people, like his brother who ruled before him. I'm sad, but it's impossible to bring him back to life.
Most younger people have a less powerful attachment to Kigeli, who never ruled them, but they feel he was entitled to certain rights.
I think that since he was a Rwandan royal, we must bring him back and bury him in Rwanda.
After the 1994 genocide, Kigeli V expressed a desire to return home. The government was prepared to welcome him as a private citizen, but not to restore his monarchy.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks very much for joining us. Do so again if you can. Take care.
L'Afrique qui bouge, c'est tous les soirs sur France 24.
Here on France 24, we track the twists and turns of the global economy for you.
نافذة فتحتها لنا ولكم France 24 كي نناقش عالم المحرمات.
So many of us are French or half French or have just been living here for a really long time, and that gives us a unique insider's perspective.
Ce qui est vraiment sympa à France 24, c'est qu'on produit vos émissions partout dans le monde, même dans les endroits les plus reculés. Ça, c'est vraiment top.